that one. Unbelieving scum. That's me. Why do I call myself that? Well, a couple of reasons, right? Unbelieving scum right here. Because I'm going to hell. Just about every religion. We still teach this shit to kids? What the fuck? What? Yeah, you've heard me bitch about it before. The other message for today is science doesn't give a fuck what you believe, okay? Science is accumulated species-wide human knowledge that we can all join in, and it has nothing to do with religion. So today, boys and girls, we're doing the science of sex and gender, as you can see there. And religions get it all wrong. They really do. Okay, episode 20. So let's define sex and gender a little bit first. Sex is the biology part. Biological system determines an individual's sexually reproductive function. That's from the wiki, right? Whether you're male or female, and how your reproductive organs are set up. Gender is psychological. Gender refers to attitudes, feelings, behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. That's from the APA, and again, everything's referenced. Gender identity is the part of gender that describes a person's psychological sense of their own gender. Many people describe gender as deeply felt, inherent sense of being a boy, a girl, something in between, non-binary, genderqueer, etc. Okay? And we can get a lot of variation in sex and gender, and it all happens in the womb. And not just for humans, for dogs, frogs, cats. Prenatal development pretty much runs the same way for all vertebrates, mammals, etc. A little different in birds, but for us to talk about, there's a bunch of ways to get variation in sex and gender. And it happens in less than 10% of the population, but it happens regularly. These are typical, atypical male and female people, but they're people. They're normal. It's normal variation. Okay. Despite what 2,000-year-old religions said upon the subject from ignorant barbaric times. Fuck all that, all right? Transgender, well, let's start at the beginning. Atypical chromosomal combinations, as it says on the slide here, right? You can get variance in the number of chromosomes. We're all familiar with XX and XY, but you can get variance on that. We're going to talk about that first. Transgender, that's where biological sex and gender identity don't match, and that's because your biological apparatus evolve in the womb, but so does your brain, and they evolve at separate times, and they don't always match up. We're going to talk about that. Sex hormone syndromes. These are genetic syndromes where the hormones involved in creating sex and gender, all the different parts, have varying effects. And sometimes you have genetic abnormalities where, for example, male hormones don't work at all or partially. Or you have an abundance of male hormones in a female. We're going to talk about that. Homosexuality also probably evolved in the womb. Same-sex attraction develops in the womb, sorry. Ambiguous genitalia is another variation in sex. Intersex people can have a very small penis, a large clitoris, a mix of both genitalia. They might be infertile. Okay, so all these things are different ways we get variation in sex and gender. Okay, the LGBTQI community has always been estimated at less than 10% of the human population, pretty much through all times, all cultures. Most recent poll I could find, a Gallup poll from U.S. 2024, just published, I think it's 2023 data, 7.6 Americans now identify as LGBTQI. So we're in that ballpark. The numbers used to be a lot smaller, but people were afraid. The reasoning went, people were afraid to identify. More people are comfortable coming out that, yeah, I have some sort of variance in sex and gender. Okay, we're going to look at 4 stages in sex and gender development during this lecture, okay? Chromosomal sex, gonadal sex, your internal sex organs, genital sex, your external sex organs, origins. I just did a Trumpism. Oranges, yeah. or brain sex and gender, which actually develops last in the womb. So let's start out with chromosomal sex and variation. Gotta slow down here. Can't read and talk at the same time. We're all familiar with typical XX and XY, female and male. I've got a slide up there you can look at. There are sex chromosomal abnormalities, one way of getting intersex people. So for example, one is trisomy X or triple X. So where you see two X's there on that female, you'd have three. Okay, usually learning disabilities, excessive height, fertile but early menopause. There's those kinds of things that happen if you have an extra X. XXY, an extra X on a male, okay, where you have an X chromosome that didn't separate and you get an extra X from your mom and you've got XXY. Klinefelter syndrome, it's called. It's a male with an extra X. Infertility is common. Small to absent testicles. The extra X interferes with normal male gonadal development. Less muscular development, less libido, probably related to brain development. X0, a missing X chromosome in a typical female. Turner syndrome, it's called. Lack of puberty development, no menstruation, breast development, fertility problems. The other X missing causes problems. XYY, that's a male with an extra Y chromosome. Jacob syndrome, it's called. They're fertile, but there's speech and learning problems, etc. So this is very typical, I shouldn't say typical, very normal atypical variation from typical male and female, right? So here's I showed you this slide already. The mighty Y chromosome. We need to talk about the Y chromosome. We should call it mighty little because, again, if you look at the picture I gave you there, the Y is, about a third the size of an X or a typical chromosome. And because it's so small, it's responsible for some sex-linked diseases like color blindness, where there's no gene on the Y chromosome because it's so small. So if you have a bad gene on the X, you can be colorblind, things like that. But the main function of the Y chromosome is to create males, okay? All males are altered females. The female is the default value of the embryo, okay? The Y chromosome sends out some proteins that stop female structures from forming and then makes male structures from them all through development. So again, all males are altered females. That comes from Veronica Drance, really excellent intersex activist. You can see her on YouTube, look her up. Female is the default value of the embryo. If you ever wondered, why do the males of many mammal species have nipples, right? Cattle, your dog, right? Cats, male humans. Why do we have nipples if we're never going to develop breasts and suckle children? Well, the default value of the embryo is female, so you change the structures you need to, right? And change the female structures into male ones internally and externally. The nipples don't matter. The breasts never develop. They're just there. 2, gonadal sex. Got a nice picture I'll put up intermittently here so you can see it. The internal sex organs. In females, it's ovary and uterus. In males, it's testes and prostate gland, okay? The Y chromosome, like I said, releases a protein, stops the ovary and uterus development. The testes develop very early from early ovary structure. This is all in the embryonic period after about 2 weeks of pregnancy. The testes that are still up in the abdomen where the ovaries would normally form produce testosterone, the main male hormone. Testosterone creates the male creates the male genitals, and later the male brain. It's the main male hormone or androgen, okay? And a dozen or so androgens make specific structural changes. We're not going to talk about all the details of all that. Just remember androgens make all these male structures. Testosterone's the main one. Okay? So, next is genital sex. The external sex organs. Females have a vagina and a clitoris. Males have a scrotum and a penis. To make male structures, what happens is the inner labia of the vagina close up and form the penile shaft. The clitoris enlarges to form the head of the penis. The outer labia close up to form the scrotum. Have you ever seen the seam on the bottom of a male's scrotum? Makes sense. The testes later finish and descend from the abdomen down into the scrotum. They go through the abdominal wall, sometimes leaving the weakness. That's why males are more susceptible to hernias than females later. I had one. It's miserable. So, again, got a great picture to show you how all this works. What can happen, one way to get intersex people is you get ambiguous genitalia, okay? Because of varying hormonal effects. Sometimes the male androgens don't do 100% of their work. Sometimes there's extra testosterone in a female. And genitalia form does not determine gender. You can have people, we use the old term, hermaphrodite, that came, science used to harken back to Greek and Roman mythology for a lot of our terminology. So hermaphrodite, Hermes, god of war, Aphrodite, goddess of love, became the term for people with kind of combination of both genitalia. But that forms differently at a different time than the brain, so just because your genitalia leans toward one way or the other doesn't guarantee what the brain's going to be like. Okay. Again, good picture of all the different variations in intersex and ambiguous genitalia. There are some syndromes that cause intersex conditions as well. They're usually genetic, where you have something wrong on a receptor or the way the gene is made. And one example is androgen insensitivity syndrome. Okay, you have an XY male. Chromosomally, the person is a male, but there's either a complete lack of male hormone effect or a partial, right? Tends to be testes. The uterus gets stopped, the ovaries get stopped, but you might have either fully female or ambiguous genitalia, usually a female brain. They're infertile because there's no uterus inside, no ovaries, right? There's testes pumping out lots of testosterone, but it doesn't do anything, so this XY male develops as a female because that's the default value of the embryo. You have to stop female development, which it tends to do and create testes, but then after that, testosterone and all the other male hormones don't do anything because of a genetic defect. And you get a fully female body, female brain. Okay? You can Google AIS on YouTube and see plenty of AIS individuals, women, and their stories. They may be chromosomally male, but they tend to be in every other way female. Now, the opposite of that syndrome, if you look on the slide there, is CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. There's a bunch of things that happens if your adrenal glands are kind of overactive, overgrown, but if you're an XX female, one of the things that can happen is the adrenal glands are pumping out male levels of testosterone, okay? Females have low levels of testosterone usually produced by the adrenal glands, but somebody with CAH can have male levels. What does that do? That starts changing the body. Even though you're an XX female, you can end up with ambiguous genitalia, an enlarged clitoris, maybe even a penis. There's usually fertility incidences or issues. And you have a higher incidence of transgender and homosexual in these people because this varying effect of hormones and how the brain develops later. Last but not least, of course, is the fourth thing in prenatal development is brain sex, which is also gender and sexual orientation. There are sources in the brain. There's a lot of brain differences between females and males. We don't have to go into the anatomy of it all here, but females have a larger corpus callosum, the huge bundle of fibers that connects the two hemispheres. Females tend to have larger language areas, a smaller amygdala, a different hypothalamus. What happens is, in males, around 7 months, there's a surge of testosterone in the womb that androgenizes the brain, creating these structural differences and a very different hypothalamus, anterior hypothalamus, okay? If the male hormones don't do the work, you just get a default value female brain. But, okay, there's a lot of differences in the male and female, especially the anterior hypothalamus buried deep in the brain, which In psych class, we say that the hypothalamus is responsible for the 4 F's. Okay, feeding, fleeing, fighting, and sex. Bum, bum. Okay. When you're hungry, your hypothalamus puts out a hormone that makes you feel hungry. When it detects low blood sugar, you're starving. Then you eat a ton of food, it sends out another hormone. When it detects blood sugar going up, that makes you feel sated. The hypothalamus is involved in your fight or flight response, and it's also very much the source of sexual orientation, sexual drive. Your ability to orgasm is mediated by the hypothalamus. They're very different in males and females, okay? There's some cell nuclei in the anterior hypothalamus that are very different in females, and homosexual men tend to resemble females in that structure. Again, default value is the female brain, so if you don't completely change the brain, you don't completely androgynize the brain, makes sense. You can have partial hormone dose and receptive effects on the male brain and what you get. Okay. Let me give you 2 examples of just the epitome of maleness from when I was growing up. 2 completely different guys. Both super athletes, handsome men, incredible physiques, the whole shot. Bruce and Bob. Let's start with Bruce, or Caitlyn Jenner, as she is now known. Incredible masculine good looks and physique, world-class athlete. He was a 1976 Olympic gold medal in the decathlon. Phenomenal level of athletics. He was on the Wheaties box when I was a kid, right? He's had children with 3 different wives, and he finally came out in 2015 as a trans woman. I had read that even back in the 70s, he was telling his first wife that he really felt like a woman or wanted to live as a woman. There's no fucking way you could have said that in the 70s or 80s, okay? Here we are in the 2020s, things have changed. It took him till 2015 that he could come out, change, and he's been living as Caitlyn Jenner. She's been living as a woman ever since. Everything I've read, he was never sexually attracted to men, and as far as I know, Caitlyn Jenner, she is not attracted to men to this day. So she's transgender and, XY chromosome, so she's heterosexual. Okay. Another example, a little later from the 80s, a guy named Bob Paris. Again, model, handsome face and physique, 1983 world bodybuilding champ. In 1989, he came out as gay. He was with his boyfriend 7 years. They broke up in 96, but he got married in 2003, and his current male spouse had been together 18 years. Okay. I've never, ever heard where Bob has said, I'm not comfortable being a man, I wish I was a woman. Never heard anything trans about him, but from his whole life, and he finally was able to come out in the late 90s, or late 80s, he was homosexual. Okay, so here you have 2 guys from my generation, right? The epitome of maleness. You can't get more masculine than Bruce Jenner back then and Bob Paris. Yet, one's trans, one's gay. And the one that's gay is not trans, and one that's trans is not gay. Okay? This is the kind of variation you can get with hormones creating all these structures and androgenizing or partially androgenizing different parts of the brain. It's phenomenal stuff. Okay. So now let's talk about religion a little bit. I didn't make a slide out of this yet. I will. Religious ignorance, discrimination, persecution. The main effect that we see in Western culture is the Old Testament and New Testament verses that are very homophobic. And from that, you have the various Christian denominations that interpret that in different ways. So the Catholics, homosexual acts are a violation of natural law, which natural law is bullshit made up by St. Augustine, and Aquinas, and ensconced in Catholic dogma. And, the desire is not a sin, but the act of being a homosexual is. So it's kind of that love the sinner, hate the sin crap that the Southern Baptist Conference also sucks up to. A lot of the Christian denominations are very liberal toward LGBTQI, but hardcore evangelical Christianity and Catholicism tend to, homosexuality is just wrong because the Old and New Testament say so, right? Islam's pretty horrible on LGBTQI. Most Muslim majority countries, about 70 of them, have laws versus homosexuality. A dozen impose the death penalty. Isn't that just special in the 21st century? Orthodox Judaism refers to OT, abomination, unacceptable. Reform Judaism, however, tends to be very accepting of the LGBTQI community. Okay, most Reformed Jews are so Reformed they're secular nowadays. Buddhism, it's considered an unnatural act, not a sin, but could get you reincarnated to a lower realm. It's ludicrous. I have a video linked in the references that it took a Tibetan Buddhist monk about 3 minutes to answer the question, where is Buddhism on gayness? And he goes through this long harangue, and he's so proud that Buddhists don't call it a sin like the Christians do. But he basically came out and said it's still an unnatural act. Kind of, I guess, for Buddhists, anything other than vaginal sex is sort of unnatural. So oral, anal sex is bad in some way. And it could get you reincarnated as a cockroach or a snake or some shit. Ridiculous, right? Hinduism, like Buddhism, some scriptures against non-vaginal sex, but in general, Hindus are mostly accepting of varying sexual orientation and gender. Now, in India, the 2019 Supreme Court struck down the criminality of homosexuality that was a leftover from British colonialism, which was most likely Christian influence. So, that's kind of where we're at around the world. Interestingly, Native American cultures, most of them, nowadays they use the term two-spirit to describe those that have both masculine and feminine traits or identities. And they were accepted, maybe even revered, as shamans, healers, spiritual helpers, until European conquests came along and brought in the Christian ugliness, right, from the Old Testament, New Testament. From science, we learn there is nothing evil, unnatural, abominable, or destructive about variation in sex and gender in any critter. Homosexuality is common in, mammals, birds. Gay and trans and intersex people are just people. They don't violate some natural law. That's bullshit. And they even tend to be better educated and less violent than the general population and make just as good parents. You can read the APA website link on some of that stuff, that research. Now, not all religions tend to be trans and homophobic, but the three religions that developed out of the Levant, which are really just versions of each other, Judaism first, Christianity, which is Judaism 2.0, and Islam, Judaism 3.0, and they dominate Western and Middle Eastern society today. They really did a number on the LGBTQI community that we are finally starting to evolve away from. I'll have more on the influence of those three religions on our modern world and why they gotta go. God. You'll notice I have my favorite bumper sticker up here. I hope you can see it. If you can't, we'll move it down here. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. That's on my car. I even have it in, where it is in here. I have it in magnet form, right? And it's true. Misogyny, homophobia, and science denial mostly disappear when religion does, okay? So, as a typical ending, end religion now, and we could get rid of all this stuff. So this was episode 20, The Science of Sex and Gender. I hope you enjoyed a little science. And if you like this channel at all, hit that subscribe button if you want to help me out. Take a look at the Patreon link on my YouTube channel there. Love your comments if you have any. And adios. See you.